Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the semester's 5th EPRC webinar. My name is Liliana Fonseca, and I'm a researcher at EPRC. I would like to say that we're very glad to have you join us virtually, even though these seminars usually take place face-to-face at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Of course, we look forward to doing this again in the future, but we are delighted to welcome you a bit from all over the world today, and hopefully for future webinars as well. Today, I would like to welcome Dr. Ridvan Cinar, who will be sharing his research on the topic towards an engaged university in the periphery, innovation, regional development, and institutional change. This presentation will last about 30 minutes, and in the remaining time, we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. But of course, feel free to also put your comments in the chat, and we'll get to these during the Q&A section of today. You can also use the Zoom raise a hand function if you so please, so that we could just ask you to unmute and ask your question. So before introducing our speaker, I would like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded, which means that you and your colleagues have the opportunity to follow the meeting at a later stage. The recording will then be made available on our YouTube channel and will be shared with you by email. We would also like to encourage you to use Twitter to share your thoughts on the webinar and spread the word on the research that our speaker will present today. So to present our speaker, Ridvan Cinar is an interdisciplinary researcher with a keen interest in innovation studies, regional studies, and higher education studies. He is currently employed as a research associate at Mon Center for Innovation and Regional Development at the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, and is working in Uni S4 Vest, which is a project on the role of universities in sustainable smart specialization in Vestlandet. He has recently completed a PhD in responsible innovation and regional development at the HVL, so the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. And during his PhD studies, he spent 2 semesters at the University of Twente in the Netherlands and the European Consortium of Innovative Universities for fieldwork as a visiting researcher. He was previously my colleague in Marie Curie Fellow, in the Marie Curie Fellowship Brunnen, which is the role of universities in innovation and regional development in Portugal. So I would thus like to give the floor to Ridvan, which you can continue your presentation now, and good luck.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much, Liliana, for introducing me and inviting me to deliver this seminar. Really great to meet you again, even though it's virtually. Shall I just start?
Yeah, feel free to.
Okay. So this presentation is based on my PhD thesis, which I defended 3 months ago. And the title of this presentation will be Towards an Engaged University in the Periphery, Innovation, Regional Development, and Institutional Change. Before I begin, let me provide you with an overview of the presentation, also my thesis. So basically, first I will start how I come up with the research questions that I have and what type of thesis I have written. And then I will walk you through the literature review and theoretical framework which I have mobilized. And then following that, I will mention the methodological consideration I have included and provide you with a glimpse of regional context of the 2 universities I've analyzed. And then I will finalize my presentation with the results, discussion, and policy recommendation, practical implications, and recommendation for future research. So basically, everything started with growing popularity of societal challenges and their visibility on our daily life. And there is now more and more institutions, governments, and international governments that asks for innovations to be transformative and responsible. These are usually characterized as transformative innovations or mission-oriented innovation. Recently, EU also has adopted a mission-oriented approach towards research and innovations. And these visions, universities have special role. The policymakers have increasingly emphasized that the role of universities should be to provide a bit more democratic and encompassing innovation and regional development. These expectations from universities at the European scale especially are very high in peripheral regions, which are characterized by having a weak institutional landscape. And it is for that weak institutional landscape that universities are asked for to fill out the void, if I can put it that way. But contributing to region and contributing to innovation, regional development, and more broadly to society is not really something new to universities. So universities have been doing that for at least since 1980s, early 1980s. But they were doing that they were using such instruments as technology transfer, startups, spin-offs, and usually this kind of contributions were happening under the framework of entrepreneurial university. So the third mission for a long time have been understood as something that is commercialized, that takes place in commercial setting, and it can be quantifiable, and it's also something that can be done by establishing startups, spin-offs, and such. So it is for that reason that universities for a long time have established technology transfer offices, science parks, and they still continue to do that. However, with the new expectations, especially with addressing societal challenges such as climate change or income inequality, the third mission or the type of engagement that universities are expected to provide the kind of contributions that universities are expected to provide are becoming a bit more diversified and also sophisticated, and they do not necessarily take place in monetized setting or in techno-economic setting. So that means that for universities who have been doing entrepreneurial university stuff for a long time, there is a change, there is an implication of change that universities should transform from entrepreneurial university to engaged university in order to be more societally relevant, but also to produce innovations that benefits a broader segments of society, not only just a few. And when I was looking at the literature, I was able to identify three knowledge gaps. First of all, there were studies that focus on universities' contribution in innovation and regional development, but most of these studies were in core regions, and core regions usually have a lot of institutions and organizations that are able to already perform such roles. And I wanted to know what about the universities in peripheral region? What exactly is going on over there in such regions? And the studies also have showed, they were showing that universities can become entrepreneurial or engaged. So they were either focusing on one or other model. But what I'm looking for and what I was wondering was that what about transforming from one model specifically to another? What if there is, starting something from scratch can sometimes be difficult, but also sometimes easier if you don't have any obstacles to think about in the future. But with established structure such as an entrepreneurial university, how would one university transform from this highly institutionalized structures to establish new institutions, units to be engaged? That was my curiosity at that time. And most studies imply that the universities should undergo some sort of change to be more societally relevant, to contribute more into innovation. But there was not really an elaboration on the change process itself. So what are their dynamics? What are the roles that actors are assuming? And to what extent that this change is affected by broader institutions? So I have formulated this three research questions, which I have delved into deeper throughout my PhD thesis. These are, my first question were about individuals and organizational efforts. So I asked, what are the characteristics of individual and organizational efforts geared towards transforming into engaged university in a peripheral region? And I also wanted to learn, find out about broader conditions and institutions, if you will, that affects this process. So I asked, under what conditions can universities located in peripheral region transform from entrepreneurial to engaged model? But this process is also could be hardly without any challenges. So I also wanted to learn the challenges that such universities would face. So my last question that I formulated is, what are the institutional and organizational challenges universities face while transforming from entrepreneurial to engaged model? My thesis was based on 5 publications. It was an article-based dissertation. And in each one of them, I have explored a different contribution of university. The first one starts with changing conceptualization of innovation at the European Union and its impact on universities. It kind of sets the floor for what it will follow. And in the other 4 articles, I look at universities' contribution into culture and creativity, bioeconomy, and social innovation. So basically, in addition to technological innovation, I also looked for social, environmental, and cultural creativity dimension. Before I go into details of this engaged university and findings, I would like to make clear what exactly the difference is so that it becomes easier to follow. The entrepreneurial university, as I understand from the literature, it's basically a contribution into economic growth, and the main policy demand is for universities to contribute into economic growth and innovation, and that happens mostly through technological innovations. While in the engaged university, one thing that is striking here, which I found throughout literature, is that all demands contributing into economic growth is not really fading away. It's just that there are new policy demands, such as contribution also into social, cultural, and environmental development. Entrepreneurial universities collaborate with a wide variety of firms and then government in the form of triple helix. But now universities are also expected to collaborate with municipalities, local councils, city councils, and other civil society actors such as NGOs, association, cooperatives. So there is this difference as well. It's a broader segments of society that they are expected to collaborate with. And usually when universities undergo some sort of organizational change in relation to their regional development vision, in entrepreneurial universities, these changes usually aim to support commercialization and technological innovation. In engaged university, in addition to that, it also includes establishing units and structures to support all types of innovation, such as social innovation, eco-innovation, green innovation, frugal innovation, and such. I have benefited largely from Uyarra's engagement modes of universities, and we can see it a bit more clear here. In the Uyarra's model, in her framework, Elvira's framework, there is a clear active commercialization role in the entrepreneurial university model, and TTOs and large manufacturing firms that they collaborate with are quite a distinctive characteristic of this type of universities. And engaged university, we see that the university starts to have a bit more developmental role, and they collaborate more intensively with regional stakeholders. And there are more linkages with different type of actors. And in that sense, engaged university has also a place focus. It's more popular with universities that are located in peripheral regions. So in terms of theoretical framework, I largely benefited from the institutional theory and different strands of institutional theory. I have mobilized 5 concepts in 5 different papers: a critical juncture, institutional complexity, institutional logics, legitimacy, and level of structuration, or basically degree of institutionalization. I used this theoretical strands in order to analyze, for instance, with critical juncture, how concept of innovation has changed at the EU. With institutional complexity, how universities navigate different policy demands. and with institutional logics, how universities contribute to social innovation with different institutional logics within their organizational boundaries and such. The main framework for my study was the 7 institutional orders, or sometimes expressed as societal level logics or societal level institutions that institutional theories have provided us. And these are family, community, religion, state, market, profession, and corporation. And in this presentation and my thesis, I will be talking about particularly 5 institutions: the community, the state, market, profession, and corporation. So basically, institutional theorists argue that these are 7 fundamental institutions that guide our behaviors in both individuals and organization in Western capitalist economies. And when I was reviewing the literature, I also realized that studies who look at the role of universities in innovation and regional development, they were either directly or indirectly indicating at the interplay of 2 institutions, namely the state and the market. But at the same time, I have also been as a researcher in different universities, and I could witness some of the dynamics in each university. And instinctively, I also raised this question: is transforming into an engaged university really all about the state and the market? So that was one of the main motivation of mine to analyze more and to look at deeper into my cases, which I will be coming soon. So in terms of methodological considerations, I have followed a philosophical approach called critical realism. It's quite a broad philosophy of science, but in summary, basically critical realists argue that there are 3 different dimensions into reality: the truth, and the real, the actual, and the empirical. And in order to one researcher to reach to truth, one has to navigate through all these 3 spheres. I will come to that in my discussion. I have adopted a qualitative multiple case study. My cases were University of Twente in the Netherlands and University of Aveiro in Portugal. Both are universities that are located in peripheral regions of their respective countries. And they are both quite either technical or technical-oriented universities. For instance, University of Twente is characterized as technical university, and University of Aveiro includes a polytechnic school in its own organizational framework. And they are also a member of a European Consortium of Innovative Universities. They are also universities that have characterized themselves as entrepreneurial university in the past and have shown willingness that they want to go beyond that. So it was quite appropriate for me to look at these 2 cases. But also they share some differences, especially the societal challenges that they are expected to contribute can be different. For instance, University of Twente in the Netherlands is expected to address the societal challenge of demographic change and migrant integration and refugee crisis. In University of Aveiro, for instance, is very much expected to deal with this acute problem of Portugal, which is rural depopulation and rural development. I have conducted 73 semi-structured interviews with key university and regional actors. And I have also analyzed 346 EU policy documents. That was for the first paper, in order to see how the concept of innovation in European Union has changed over time. And in addition to this data, I also have analyzed other written material as secondary source, such as strategic plans of both universities and action plans and smart specialization of both regions. And I have done content analysis, thematic analysis, and Gioia methodology. This resulted in 1 inductive and 4 deductive reasoning-based papers. Before I proceed with the findings, let me provide you with a little bit of regional context. So Twente, the Netherlands, it's one of the few peripheral regions in the Netherlands. It's characterized as peripheral within Dutch context. It's quite in the eastern part of the country, bordering Germany, with a population of 600,000. And previously, it was until late 90s and 70s, it was a heavy textile-based industry that dominated the region. But right now, it is ICT, services, agriculture, and construction and tourism. And Aveiro, you must have heard about it from previous seminars as well. It's a coastal region in the central part or central region of Portugal, and it's characterized as less developed peripheral by EU indicators, and it's non-core within Portuguese context as well. And currently, its industrial base is characterized by agri-food, forestry, metallurgy, chemical, tourism, and ICT. So basically, there are a lot of findings, but the two overall findings that I would like to mention are that in the literature review, I had asked if it is only the state and the market that impacts university in this change process. But I also realized that I also find out that it's not only these two, but there is also the impact of three other institutions that are the profession, the community, and the corporation on institutional change. In a while, I will show how these all five institutions influences this change process. And the second overall finding is that despite being located in peripheral regions, it seems that institutions located there are able to exert influence and power on shaping university behavior, to go as far as even to shape their organizational identity. And my first question was, what are the characteristics of the individual and organizational efforts geared towards transforming into engaged university in a peripheral region? Going back to that question, I find out that actors have within both universities have used 2008 economic financial crisis as an opportunity to advance their interests, to turn their university to become more engaged. They have created new units, and one of the key issues was to be able to link local with global through intensive collaboration. For instance, designers in University of Aveiro have intensively collaborated with the best design schools in Europe, as they argue, like Aalto University, Politecnico di Milano, etc. And but also the management, the university management has also created a space for their researchers, for their academic staff to shape their professional identities and research interests. And they have developed key partnership and engagement with broader societal stakeholders, not only with TTOs or industries and government, but also local government, municipalities, and city councils. And more, last but not least, they also have encouraged ownership of a third mission activity. So if there wasn't third mission activity in a university, in either university, the management have tried to make it sure that it's owned by multiple disciplines, not only one. And my second question was, under what conditions can universities located in peripheral regions transform from entrepreneurial to engaged model? So I wanted to look at the broader structural conditions that affects this process. At the macro level, it seems that a relevant conjuncture of particular developments helps and facilitates this institutional change process. By this, I mean that the wind should kind of like blow from the side of universities through, and through this wind, they should be able to sail. And at the moment, and for the last 5-6 years, the wind is indeed blowing from their side, because there is more demand from the policy for them to contribute to their region, to develop collaborations with more societal stakeholders, but also smart specialization have also provided them with a legitimacy to engage in some sort of institutional change process. And I'm not arguing that there should be always a relevant conjuncture of particular development. I don't argue it to be a precursor to institutional change, but my findings show that if there is such developments that benefits, that aligns with what actors within university wanted to change, then it definitely facilitates this institutional change process. And at the macro level, there is also a need for coherence among European, national, and regional visions and expectations. For instance, if the regional smart specialization, national smart specialization, or at the European level, what is expected from universities at the EU level mostly is aligning, then it's much likely that universities will be able to gain legitimacy and also access to sort of funding through which they could engage in organizational change that will lead to responsible innovations. There is also a need for supportive organizational identity, or it seems to be quite important in what type of contribution a university wants to do. There is also a need for relevant and supportive institutional logics, and the kind of contributions and the kind of change that the actors within university aiming, that they should have some legitimacy. So at the macro level, governments and in supranational institutions can provide regulative, normative, or cultural cognitive legitimacy through verbal praise or policy demand or providing funding. And there is also a need for stable and relevant academic identities. If a university wants to contribute into a certain type of innovation, a certain type of regional development, then it should have the kind of academic staff that would have a stable and relevant academic identity, so that this contribution can manifest over a long time, and it should be permanent. But it's also important at the micro level that a university activity is owned by heterogeneous actors and disciplines for it to be more institutionalized. And universities also should be able to have some sort of organizational agility, because the world is changing quite a lot, especially innovation field and sustainability field is changing quite a lot. What we know now cannot maintain its validity 10 years later, so, or even 5 years later. So universities should have some sort of organizational agility to respond, to be more responsive to the broader changes. And I have also found a lot of institutional organizational challenges. I will not go through each one of them, but some of the most important one is that for instance, there is despite 60 years, there is a very techno-economic understanding of innovation that dominates innovation studies. And this is a bit of challenge, because ultimately engaged university want to go beyond this. It doesn't want to rule out technology or commercialization, but an engaged university will engage in kind of innovations that does not necessarily take place in monetized setting as well. So this is one of the broader global level challenges that two universities faces. And at the same time, both universities, because of their entrepreneurial history and entrepreneurial university structure, and many universities have the two universities have this structures going on for a long time, and their academic staff have some sort of identity that have associated with that type of university. So their engagement, understanding of engagement behavior is sometimes necessarily about commercialization. And it will take some time for this academic staff to adapt that there might be also other type of engagement and other type of identities that they should have or evolve into. And another has happened and concur with other findings, that universities are also finding themselves with balancing regional development and with global status competition. So rankings, on the one hand, they try to improve in rankings. On the other hand, they try to be more regionally relevant. This is also creating a lot of tensions, and the difficulty of collaborating with non-industry partners. And for the last 4 decades, universities have intensively collaborated with industry. And in the beginning, in early 1980s, it was also not easy, but over time they have become accustomed to it. and they started to know the industry or industrial dynamics quite well. The same thing happening with non-industrial partners now. Right now, it's quite difficult to collaborate because the expectations, the way that people work in such institutions does not necessarily show parallel with dynamics of university, and it will take some time for universities to collaborate more intensively with non-industrial partners as well. So in the literature review, I had asked the impact of several institutions on this change process, and I wanted to look at the empirical, the actual, and the real in order to understand how the empirical is triggered by and to what kind of mechanisms trigger it. So let's look at those 5 institutions. In state, my empirics show that there is growing number of institutional demands and the teaching load of academic staff have increased, and there is more and more pressure to deliver the public good. Especially public good is understood as a contribution to society in the immediate geographic vicinity. And this is because what is happening actually is the event of austerity and budget cuts in both countries, both Netherlands and Portugal, more severely in Portugal. And this is at the broader level related to the mechanism which triggered this. There is a trend of state withdrawal from all spheres in both countries, more visibly in Portugal than Netherlands, but Netherlands also have a state withdrawal trend going on for some time. And in market, what is happening is that there is more pressure on publications and generation of external funding and industry collaboration. And that happens because universities want to improve their rankings. But what is triggered by, what triggers this is at the broader level is status competition between universities. If there wasn't even rankings, and there would be some sort of mechanism or structure that would drive universities engage into status competition. And this is how the market is influencing this change process. And in cooperation is partly related to the dynamics in the market. There are, for a long time, there have been involvement of external stakeholders, mainly businesses, into governance bodies, profit, and universities engage in profit-seeking strategies. They started to be more profit-driven, and they look at securing more and more funding externally. And they have also engaged in differentiation strategies as if they are like a company in an industry. So in a sense, they started to act in a more corporate-like. So this is triggered basically by the new public management, which encouraged such behavior. And this is how the corporation as an institution is influencing universities and broader change that they are going through right now. And how does the professions affect universities in this? So basically, the transformation from entrepreneurial to engaged university results in some tension between organizational and academic identities, because most academic staff have been socialized into the logic of entrepreneurial university. They have learned how to do that, and they have worked in that way. So somebody coming them and saying them that, but you should also this things are not really necessarily the things that they will be familiar with, and it results in professional identity. And it seems that this is because universities are basically trying to engage in institutional profiling. They also differentiate themselves in the broader higher education landscape from their peers. But this differentiation process is mostly triggered by their willingness to balance global excellence with regional relevance, because even the most excellent university right now is under pressure to be regionally relevant or societally relevant. And it seems that and there is no, my findings show that there is no one such thing as academic staff. There is their disciplinary backgrounds first, then they are professional academic staff. So as a professor in economic geography, for instance, would consider himself as an economic geographer first, and then as a professor or academic staff. And these disciplinary backgrounds have started to play a bigger role in their daily activities. And lastly, the community. Both universities have tried to enlarge their partnerships, and they have gone to partner with municipalities, NGOs, associations. But this is mainly because both universities have engaged in reclaiming their regional relevance and public status. And why is this happening? This is also triggered because their organizational legitimacy have been at risk. The community in both universities, in the regions that they are located, have delegitimized their public status and regional relevance. They put the organizational legitimacy of both universities and their public status at risk. And in order to gain legitimacy, basically universities engage in some sort of partnership development in order to remain legitimate and societally relevant. So this is how the community also can affect this change process. And I have some conclusions. Let's start with policy recommendations and practical implications. I have realized that if we want at European level universities to be more societally relevant and to contribute into innovation and regional development more intensively, we should develop a different type of structural funds, a different type of scheme, a new funding scheme specifically developed for universities in less developed regions or peripheral regions, because at the moment, not all universities located in peripheral regions or less developed regions characterized by EU can access these funds. But at the same time, when they access it, for instance, in the case of Aveiro, they have to share it with the other two universities and other societal partners, such as industry in the same region. So if we want specific peripheral regions to develop and universities to contribute into this development, we should develop a new scheme specifically for such universities. And it seems that the executive management and executive board of both universities or rectory team is involved with people with strong linkages with industry or industrial background, which is fine. But we also need to start thinking involving non-industrial and regional actors in university senates and councils, since earlier demands of entrepreneurial university will not fade away, and the engaged university is basically a bit more demand coming up on the top of the entrepreneurial university model. I argue that the involvement of non-industrial or regional actors in university senate councils should not be at the expense of removing the industrial ones. And there are great synergies to be built, but it is time that we should also start thinking about municipality representation or not NGO representation in university senate councils as well, if they are public universities and regional-oriented universities. And for a university to engage in different type of contribution, it should also hire to academic staff with different interdisciplinary and different disciplinary and professional socialization. And lastly, there is a lot of literature on the role of institutions in innovation and regional development, and most of them are characterized as weak. And in my findings show that despite located in peripheral region and despite being so-called institutionally weak region, those institutions were able to exert power and shape the organizational identity of both universities. So my question is, are peripheries, especially in Western Europe, since my cases are Portugal and Netherlands, really institutional thin, weak regions? We should, I argue that we should have a renewed debate on the role of institutions, especially in peripheries in Western Europe. And I have a recommendation for future research. My PhD thesis took place in European universities. And Europe usually, European Union countries usually have some sort of social welfare state. And I wonder how this institutional change process will be in comprehensive universities and those located in non-European contexts. I am curious of what differs in there, especially in non-technological, non-technical universities and in non-European contexts, and what other factors might be in play. And I am also interested in knowing how formal and informal institutions in these peripheral regions evolve over time, because when we talk about state or market or the community, is not the same state, market, or community 10 years ago, 5 years ago. The way these institutions behave or influence can be changing. We might be talking about a different state 5 years ago and a different market 10 years later. So I wonder how over time these institutions evolved and how this evolution affects the institutional change process in universities. That was the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ridvan. That was a very good presentation. We were very lucky to be able to hear a bit more about your PhD research. I would just like to open the floor now to anyone who would like to ask questions. I have a few of my own, but I'm waiting to give a bit of room for other people to join in. If not, I can just start with one of my questions, which is coming from kind of a misunderstanding of mine. So in the beginning, so you talked about all those institutional, I believe it was conditions. The one that you said was the state, market, organization, and stuff like that. And you said, I think that universities are kind of at the crux of the state and market. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Why those two? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I mean, it just depends on the initiatives that several governments have put out there in order to influence universities. They might have developed special funding scheme. Their government might have developed special funding scheme for them to climb up higher in the rankings, or a different incentive for them to engage in regional development. Some governments have developed an expertise for universities and saying that this is your specialization area and you should contribute in that region and in that way to the region that you are located. And market is because universities also have started to be able to generate profit and such. So the authors have usually argued that either one way or other, it is the state and market that influences universities, and other 5 institutions that institutional theorists argue, they were left out. And I tried to bring 3 of them back, basically.
Okay, thank you. I also had another question. This time is more related to kind of the trajectory of change and development, which is, okay, so we see kind of this change from entrepreneurial to engaged. Is this, would you say it's a firm change in both these institutions? Are they now considered then engaged, or are they still kind of entrepreneurial? Are they both? Are they heading towards another direction in the future? What do you think? How will that take place?
That's a very interesting question, actually. They would not deny that they are becoming engaged in university, because that is what the policy demand shows wants them, and they want to protect, maintain their legitimacy. But at the same time, entrepreneurially engaged university as a label is not as cool as entrepreneurial university. So they would like to also continue labeling themselves. And even if it's not directly with entrepreneurial university, they would say that they are entrepreneurial as well. The more engaged university starts to have more positive and dominant role, the more they are likely to go in that direction in adopting it. But at the ground level, in more practical way, they are becoming more engaged one way or another. I cannot say that they have fully completed this change process. There is a lot of a lot of things to do, and a lot of milestones to go, but they are in that right direction, but it will take a lot of time.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question to Ridvan? You have the unique opportunity now to know more about his research. Would you consider that the university where you are now, in the Western Norway University, would you consider it engaged or entrepreneurial?
Oh, definitely. It's engaged university. I mean, because we have 5 campuses in 5 other cities, not only in Bergen, and we are in the process of applying to become a full university in Norway, and so it will be University of Western Norway hopefully soon. And one of our biggest argument is that there is a need for us because we will develop 5 regions.
Okay. Well, in case since there's no one that is going to ask a question, I'll just ask another one.
Okay.
You mentioned that it was necessary as well to have different concepts of innovation, moving away from just the techno-economical one. So how does that manifest maybe in these types of universities? What kind of innovations do you mean that go outside of that?
I mean, it's usually social innovation or sometimes eco-innovation. Basically, the type of innovations that does not fall under the category of technology or commercialization. For instance, you might develop in some sort of organizational type of innovation, changing some regulations or legislative forms in one region, and that would improve livelihood of some people, but it will not necessarily bring anything in return economically to universities, or technologically. It will not improve their technological base, and there will be no need for technology to be deployed in such sort of innovation or any sort of or as social innovation. So these innovations are usually sidelined because of this. Yeah.
Yes, I think we have a question from Christian. Could you maybe unmute yourself and turn on your video to ask? Oh, unfortunately, I can't hear you. I don't know if it's just.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's great.
Hi, thank you, Ridvan. It was a very interesting presentation, and it really sparked kind of my interest in the university settings and the transformations that they're going through. And I was wondering, I was curious if you could give us maybe some concrete examples what the University of Twente and the University of Aveiro have done, in kind of shifting from entrepreneurial to an engaged university. I thought that was it would be interesting to hear about that. And second, how do you assess the capacity of these institutions, or what is kind of needed? What do they still need to kind of make this shift?
Yeah,
thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for this question, Christian. And University of Aveiro, for instance, has created a pro-rectorship for regional development. And there is also a vice rector for regional development. So the regional development part got really important in there. And the design, it also established a design factory, but which hosts many type of social innovations at its premises right now. And University of Twente basically is considering to establish a chair at the moment to have in social entrepreneurship and social innovation. It's a long discussion going on, and it's quite difficult because a chair usually comes up with other stuff as well. So there will be some sort of funding and a kind of new department to be established, or it should be a part of entrepreneurship research center. But there was a consideration when I was carrying out my interviews that there is definitely a need for a chair in social entrepreneurship in order to make university to care more about social side of innovation and entrepreneurship. I can go on more and more, but there are publications on that as well. I can send you if you're interested. Yeah. And in the second question, for me, the most important thing and what I'm observing in both universities is that the social sciences are getting weak and weaker. And both these two universities, strangely and ironically, are getting more entrepreneurial and technology and engineering oriented. Social sciences have less space in their organizational boundaries. Like, for instance, University of Aveiro does not have a department of sociology or psychology, etc. And University of Twente, many departments in social sciences have been shut down. There is 1 or 2 research centers that makes on research on social sciences, and this is caused by them promoting themselves as high-tech university. So I feel like if you want to, if both universities want to become more engaged, they definitely need more social science disciplines and more academic staff with social science background, even if they work in technology related disciplines.
Thank you, Christian, for your questions. And thank you also, Ridvan, for those answers. I find it really interesting, actually, how universities can have such a broad engagement with their regions. Sometimes it's kind of like hidden because, like you said there, it's not really commercialized that easily. And I wonder, would it be then of interest then for these universities if there's no monetary gain, let's say, from this type of engagement? Like what kind of benefits would they be able to get?
They might get some prestige and public relevance and legitimacy, and which might seem even more important than acquiring funding. For instance, I don't know if in how it's in UK or in other countries, but in Norway, if a university gets the university status, it's not permanent. If it does not fulfill its obligations or what it promised in 5 years, for instance, its university status can be taken and the university can easily become again University of Applied Sciences. So there is this issue.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Becoming public relevant and legitimacy is becoming more and more important. But I'm curious, Liliana, how is it the University of Strathclyde now that we are doing a seminar in there? Would you characterize it as an entrepreneurial or engaged university?
Well, I might characterize it as a mix of both, actually. I do find that it's a university that at least it kind of facilitates its staff to engage in different ways. So, for example, there's 3 different paths for academic career. You have teaching, research, and then knowledge exchange. And I think that really facilitates the staff to kind of tailor their career path into what they're more interested in, which is not always easy, as we've seen also in Aveiro.
Yeah, and it's interesting to have a career path in knowledge exchange as well.
Yeah, and it really works. I would say also, actually, one of my colleagues here, Heidi, she's working a lot with the Arctic University and other communities like that. So I wondered if you had any suggestions for universities that are on the extreme periphery. Because usually, yes, they tend to want to engage in more social innovation, I would say, and community development. Do you find that you would notice anything different in those extremely peripheral?
I mean, I have not
places?
been myself there, but I know people also collaborating with the Arctic University of Tromsø, for instance. It's a completely different environment. But in the Norwegian case, they might not necessarily be peripheral because of economic indicators, but just because of geographical distance. Yeah. But definitely they have other dynamics going on, and they might be actually the universities that are expected to become engaged.
Yeah. Well, I would say that we had a very interesting discussion actually from this, and you have a lot to explore, whether in Europe or outside of it in this topic. I would say, yeah, either extremely peripheral universities outside of Europe and other sort of contexts. I think that would be a good thing to take note of. Is there anything that you want to make a remark of since we're at the end about your research, Ridvan?
Not really, but in case somebody is curious about these issues or have any question, they can always ask me later by mail, in Twitter, etc. And yeah, just do that if you have any questions, and I'm happy to help as much as I can.
Thank you, Ridvan. Yes, we will be able to also share Ridvan's presentation and some of his research through email after this webinar. So feel free to contact us in case you have any questions as well. We can redirect it to Ridvan. And thank you everyone as well for your interest in today's webinar. Our next webinar will be on June 29th when Dr. Jaroslav Kocki, from an associate professor from John Evangelista Perkiny University in Czechia, will present on EU cohesion policy in Czech Republic. So you can contact us to register for our mailing list and keep up to date on other future webinars and events. And yeah, we hope to see you again in the future. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ridvan, again.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Liliana, for inviting me.
My pleasure to see you again. And no problem, Heidi. You can always get back to Ridvan in case you have any questions, and I hope you all have a good day. See you then.
Good day all.